Introduction to Business, 2nd edition, an OpenStax textbook. Read along with the full text at openstax.org. This audiobook was produced by Open Audio. Listen for free on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or on our website at openaudio.us.
Chapter 1. Understanding Economic Systems and Business. Introduction.
Learning outcomes. After reading this chapter, you should be able to answer these questions. 1. How do businesses and not-for-profit organizations help create our standard of living? 2. What are the sectors of the business environment, and how do changes in them influence business decisions? 3. What are the primary features of the world's economic systems, and how are the three sectors of the U.S. economy linked? 4. How do economic growth, full employment, price stability, and inflation indicate a nation's economic health? 5. How does the government use monetary policy and fiscal policy to achieve its macroeconomic goals? 6. What are the basic microeconomic concepts of demand and supply, and how do they establish prices? 7. What are the 4 types of market structure? 8. Which trends are reshaping the business, microeconomic and macroeconomic environments and competitive arena?
Exploring business careers. Team Rubicon, disaster relief and a sense of purpose. Accounting for a substantial amount of economic activity in the United States, not-for-profits are an undeniable force in the business world, even though their focus on goals other than profit falls outside the traditional model of a for-profit business. But it is this shift away from a focus on profit that allows them to pursue missions of social improvement and contributions to society as a whole. To be truly effective in a not-for-profit organization, a person must share the organization's vision. The vision for Team Rubicon was shaped by its co-founders, Jake Wood and William McNulty, who saw the devastation caused by the Haiti earthquake in 2010 and sprang into action. Both Marines, Wood and McNulty, knew they could do something to help in this devastating and chaotic situation. Within 24 hours, they enlisted the help of 6 other military veterans and first responders, gathered donations and supplies from friends and family, and made their way to Haiti to help with disaster relief. And Team Rubicon was born. The organization gets its name from the Rubicon, a river in northern Italy that Julius Caesar and his troops crossed on their epic march to Rome, with the river marking the point of no return. The name underscores the co-founders' experiences during the Haitian disaster, where, despite advice from government officials and other aid organizations not to proceed, their small team crossed into Haiti from the Dominican Republic, carrying crucial gear and medical supplies to thousands of earthquake victims. Team Rubicon is a veteran-led humanitarian organization that serves communities before, during, and after disasters. By mobilizing the skills of military veterans, first responders, and civilian volunteers, it delivers swift, effective relief while providing veterans with continued purpose, community, and opportunities to serve. Through the organization's efforts, Team Rubicon seeks to provide volunteers, including veterans, a purpose gained through involvement in disaster relief and support for humanitarian crises, a sense of community built by serving with a mixed volunteer base, and a feeling of identity from recognizing the impact one individual can make. Headquartered in the Los Angeles area, Team Rubicon is staffed by energetic employees who work both domestically and internationally, with thousands of volunteers ready to deploy within 24 hours. Similar to company operations in for-profit organizations, staff positions at Team Rubicon include regional administrators, field operations, including membership and training, marketing, communications, and social media, fundraising and partnership development, finance and accounting, and people operations. Team Rubicon staff members bring professional and/or military experience to their daily jobs, but they all share the organization's vision. Many staff members started as volunteers for Team Rubicon while working in for-profit careers, while others took advantage of the organization's strong internship program to become familiar with its mission and focus on disaster relief. In 2023, Team Rubicon trained nearly 30,000 veterans and other volunteers, and responded to over 200 disasters and humanitarian efforts. As of 2024 cumulatively, the organization has logged over 250,000 volunteer hours and has impacted more than 3 million people in many communities across the world. Team Rubicon relies on partnerships, including Southwest Airlines, which supports volunteer travel through its Rapid Rewards Points for a Purpose program, and in-kind assistance to help deploy teams quickly. Team Rubicon actively engages its nationwide community at every level of the organization, from volunteer to board member, and every step of its operation, from training to planning to implementation to seeking donations and volunteers to help with any type of disaster relief. Team Rubicon has been recognized as one of the top nonprofits to work for by the Nonprofit Times, based on employee surveys and business partners' input about the organization's work environment. The not-for-profit world may not be for everyone, but if its growth is any indication within the overall economy, it does appeal to many. With the resolve to assist those in need, including both disaster victims and returning military personnel, Team Rubicon offers opportunities for those interested in nonprofit careers, as well as those passionate about helping others.
This module provides the basic structures upon which the business world is built, how it is organized, what outside forces influence it, and where it is heading. It also explores how the world's economies and governments shape economic activity. Each day in the United States, thousands of new businesses are born. Only a rare few will make it to the Fortune 500 list. Unfortunately, many others will never see their first anniversary. Those who succeed understand that change is the one constant in the business environment. Those organizations pay attention to the business environment in which they operate and the trends that affect all businesses, and then successfully adapt to those trends. In this module, we will meet many businesses, both large and small, profit and not-for-profit, that prosper because they track trends and use them to identify potential opportunities. This ability to manage change is a critical factor in separating the success stories from the tales of business failure. We begin our study of business by introducing you to the primary functions of a business, the relationship between risk and profits, and the importance of not-for-profit organizations. We'll also examine the major components of the business environment and how changing demographic, social, political, and legal and competitive factors affect all business organizations. Next, we'll explore how economies provide jobs for workers and also compete with other businesses to create and deliver products to consumers. You will also learn how governments attempt to influence economic activity through policies such as lowering or raising taxes. Then, we discuss how supply and demand determine prices for goods and services. Finally, we conclude by examining key trends in the business environment, economic systems, and the competitive environment.
One point one: The nature of business. Learning objective: how do businesses and not-for-profit organizations help create our standard of living?
Take a moment to think about the many different types of businesses you come into contact with on a typical day. As you commute to class or work, you may pass a gas station that is part of a major national oil company, or a fast food chain, such as Chipotle, or Chick-fil-A, or the neighborhood pizza place. When you need to manage money, you can do your banking on a smartphone or other device via mobile apps. You don't even have to visit the store anymore, since online shopping brings the stores to you, offering everything from clothes to food, furniture, and electronics. A business is an organization that strives for a profit by providing goods and services desired by its customers. Businesses meet the needs of consumers by providing medical care, autos, and countless other goods and services. Goods are tangible items manufactured by businesses, such as laptops. Services are intangible offerings of businesses that can't be held, touched, or stored. Physicians, lawyers, hairstylists, car washes, and airlines all provide services. Businesses also serve other organizations, such as hospitals, retailers, and governments, by providing machinery, goods for resale, computers, and thousands of other items. Thus, businesses create the goods and services that are the basis of our standard of living. The standard of living of any country is measured by the output of goods and services people can buy with the money they have. The United States has one of the highest standards of living in the world. The standard of living also incorporates the prices of goods and services. So although some countries may have higher average wages than the United States, their standard of living may not necessarily be higher because of higher prices for goods and services. They are able to buy less because of the higher prices, despite higher average wages. For example, in the United States, you can purchase a combo meal at a fast food restaurant, often for less than $10, while in another country, a similar meal might cost nearly $20. Businesses play a key role in determining our quality of life by providing jobs and goods and services to society. Quality of life refers to the general level of human happiness based on such things as life expectancy, educational standards, health, sanitation, and leisure time. Building a high quality of life is a combined effort of businesses, government, and not-for-profit organizations. In 2024, Luxembourg, Denmark, and the Netherlands ranked the highest in quality of life, with Switzerland, Finland, and Oman close behind. It may come as a surprise that the United States is not one of the top 10 countries in terms of quality of life. The United States was ranked 14th. The majority of the top 10 countries are in Western Europe, and the lower end of the scale includes Bangladesh, Venezuela, and Nigeria. Creating a quality of life is not without risks. However, risk is the potential to lose time and money or otherwise not be able to accomplish an organization's goals. Without enough blood donors, for example, the American Red Cross faces the risk of not meeting the demand for blood by victims of disaster. Businesses such as Procter & Gamble face the risk of falling short of their revenue and profit goals. Revenue is the money a company receives by providing services or selling goods to customers. Costs are expenses for rent, salaries, supplies, transportation, and many other items that a company incurs from creating and selling goods and services. For example, some of the costs incurred by Procter & Gamble in producing consumer products such as paper towels and diapers include expenses for salaries, manufacturing facilities, raw materials to make the products, and advertising. If Procter & Gamble has money left over after it pays all costs, it has a profit. A company whose costs are greater than revenues shows a loss. When a company such as Procter & Gamble uses its resources intelligently, it can often increase sales, hold costs down, and earn a profit. Not all companies earn profits, but that is the risk of being in business. In U.S. business today, there is generally a direct relationship between risks and profit. The greater the risks, the greater the potential for profit or loss. Companies that take too conservative a stance may lose out to more nimble competitors who react quickly to the changing business environment. Take Sony, for example, the Japanese electronics giant. Once a leader with its Walkman music player and Trinitron televisions, steadily lost ground and profits over just a short time period to other companies by not embracing new technologies such as the digital music format and flat panel TV screens. Sony misjudged what the market wanted and stayed with proprietary technologies rather than create cross-platform options for consumers. Apple, at the time an upstart in personal music devices, quickly grabbed the lion's share of the digital music market with its iPods and iTunes music streaming service. As a result, Sony had to restructure its business portfolio and has since experienced substantial success with its gaming console and original gaming content. Not-for-profit organizations. Not all organizations strive to make a profit. A not-for-profit organization is an organization that exists to achieve some goal other than the usual business goal of profit. Organizations such as Feeding America, the Smithsonian Institution, and Amnesty International are not-for-profit organizations, as are most hospitals, zoos, arts organizations, civic groups, and religious organizations. The number of nonprofit organizations and the employees and volunteers who work for them continues to increase. Government is our largest and most pervasive not-for-profit group. In addition, nearly 2 million non-governmental not-for-profit entities operate in the United States today and contribute more than $1 trillion annually to the U.S. economy. Like their for-profit counterparts, these groups set goals and require resources to meet those goals. However, their goals are not focused on profits. For example, a not-for-profit organization's goal might be assisting with food security, preserving the environment, increasing attendance at an arts center, or preventing drunk driving. Not-for-profit organizations do not compete directly with one another, in the same manner as, for example, Walmart and Target. But they do compete for talented employees, people's limited volunteer time, and donations. The boundaries that formerly separated not-for-profit and for-profit organizations have blurred, leading to a greater exchange of ideas between the sectors. As discussed in detail in the ethics chapter, for-profit businesses are now addressing social issues. Successful not-for-profits apply business principles to operate more effectively. Not-for-profit managers are concerned with the same concepts as their colleagues in for-profit companies: developing strategy, budgeting carefully, measuring performance, encouraging innovation, improving productivity, demonstrating accountability, and fostering an ethical workplace environment. In addition to pursuing a museum's artistic goals, for example, top executives manage the administrative and business side of the organization: human resources, finance, and legal concerns. Ticket revenues cover a fraction of the museum's operating costs, so the director spends a great deal of time seeking major donations and memberships. Today's museum boards of directors include both art patrons and business executives who want to see sound fiscal decision-making in a not-for-profit setting. Therefore, a museum director must walk a fine line between the institution's artistic mission and financial policies. Factors of production, the building blocks of business. To provide goods and services, regardless of whether they operate in the for-profit or not-for-profit sector, organizations require inputs in the form of resources called factors of production. Those factors are categorized into four groupings: land, including natural resources; labor, people and the skills they bring; capital, money used to purchase needed assets; and entrepreneurship, business acumen to bring it all together. By using the factors of production efficiently, a company can produce more goods and services with the same resources. Commodities that are useful inputs in their natural state are known as natural resources. They include farmland, forests, mineral and oil deposits, and water. Sometimes natural resources are simply called land, although, as you can see, the term means more than just land. Companies use natural resources in different ways. Procter & Gamble uses cotton to make diapers, and ExxonMobil may use water and oil to produce gasoline. Today, urban sprawl, pollution, and limited resources have raised questions about resource use. Conservationists, environmentalists, and government bodies work toward creating legislation to require land use planning and resources conservation that help ensure responsible usage of our natural resources. Labor, or human resources, refers to the economic contributions of people working with their minds and muscles. This input includes the talents of everyone, from a restaurant cook to a nuclear physicist, who performs the many tasks of manufacturing and selling goods and services. The tools, machinery, equipment, and buildings used to produce goods and services and get them to the consumer are known as capital. Sometimes the term capital is also used to mean the money that buys machinery, factories, and other production and distribution facilities. However, because money itself produces nothing, it is not one of the basic inputs. Instead, it is a means of acquiring the inputs. Therefore, in this context, capital does not include money. Entrepreneurs are the people who combine the inputs of natural resources, labor, and capital to produce goods or services with the intention of making a profit or accomplishing a not-for-profit goal. These people make the decisions that set the course for their businesses. They create products and production processes, or develop services. Because they are not guaranteed a profit in return for their time and effort, they must be risk takers. Of course, if their companies succeed, the rewards may be great. Today, many individuals want to start their own businesses. They are attracted by the opportunity to be their own boss and reap the financial rewards of a successful firm. Many start their first business from their dorm rooms, such as Mark Zuckerberg of Meta, or while living at home, so their cost is almost zero. Entrepreneurs include people such as Amazon's founder Jeff Bezos, as well as Elon Musk of Tesla and SpaceX, and Walt Disney. Many thousands of individuals have started companies that, while remaining small, make a major contribution to the U.S. economy. A number of outstanding managers and noted academics emphasize knowledge as a key factor of production. Knowledge refers to the combined talents and skills of the workforce and has become a primary driver of economic growth. Today's competitive environment places a premium on knowledge and learning over physical resources. Statistics suggest that the number of U.S. knowledge workers is over 70 million and represents nearly 50% of the total workforce. Although some jobs and tasks have been replaced by automation or outsourced globally, technological advancements have actually created more jobs that require specialized knowledge and skills.
Catching the entrepreneurial spirit. Sticker giant embraces change. Entrepreneurs typically are not afraid to take risks or change the way they do business if it means there is a better path to success. Company founder John Fisher fits the profile. The drawn-out U.S. presidential election in 2000, between Bush and Gore, inspired Fisher to create a bumper sticker that claimed, "He's not my president," which became a top seller. As a result of this venture, Fisher started an online retail sticker store, which he viewed as possibly the Amazon of stickers. Designing and making stickers in his basement, Fisher's startup would eventually become a multi-million-dollar company, recognized in 2017 by Forbes as one of its top 25 small businesses. The Sticker Giant online store was successful, supplying everything from sports stickers to ones commemorating rock and roll bands and breweries. By 2011, the business was going strong. However, the entrepreneur decided to do away with the retail store, instead focusing the business on custom orders, which became Sticker Giant's main product. As the company became more successful and added more employees, Fisher once again looked to make some changes. In 2012, he decided to introduce a concept called Open Book Management, in which he shares the company's financials with employees at a weekly meeting. Other topics discussed at the meeting include customer comments and feedback, employee concerns, and colleague appreciation for one another. Fisher believes sharing information about the company's performance, good or bad, not only allows employees to feel part of the operation, but also empowers them to embrace change or suggest ideas that could help the business expand and flourish. Innovation is also visible in the technology Sticker Giant uses to create miles and miles of custom stickers. The manufacturing process involves digital printing and laser finishing equipment. Fisher says only 5 other companies worldwide have the laser finishing equipment Sticker Giant uses as part of its operations. Because of the investment in this high-tech equipment, the company can make custom stickers in large quantities overnight and ship them to customers the next day. This small business continues to evolve with an entrepreneur at the helm who is not afraid of making changes or having fun. In 2016, Sticker Giant put together Sol the Sticker Ball, a Guinness World Records winner that weighed in at a whopping 232 pounds. Fisher and his employees created Sol when they collected more than 170,000 stickers that had been lying around the office and decided to put them to good use. Sticker Giant, now part of Resource Label Group, acquired in 2021, operates with roughly 50 to 200 employees and estimated revenue well above $10 million. Questions for discussion. 1. How does being a risk taker help Fisher in his business activities? 2. If you were a small business owner, would you consider sharing the company's financial data with employees? Explain your reasoning.
Concept check. 1. Explain the concepts of revenue, costs, and profit. 2. What are the 5 factors of production? 3. What is the role of an entrepreneur in society?
1.2. Understanding the business environment. Learning objective. What are the sectors of the business environment, and how do changes in them influence business decisions?
Businesses do not operate in a vacuum, but rather in a dynamic environment that has a direct influence on how they operate and whether they will achieve their objectives. This external business environment is composed of numerous outside organizations and forces that we can group into broad categories. as Exhibit 1.4 illustrates: economic, political/legal, social, technological, global, demographic, and competitive. Each of these sectors creates a unique set of challenges and opportunities for businesses. Business owners and managers have a great deal of control over the internal environment of business, which covers day-to-day decisions. They choose the supplies they purchase, which employees they hire, the products they sell, and where they sell those products. They use their skills and resources to create goods and services that will satisfy existing and prospective customers. However, the external environmental conditions that affect a business are generally beyond the control of management and change constantly. To compete successfully, business owners and managers must continuously study the environment and adapt their businesses accordingly. Other forces, such as natural disasters and human-made disasters, can also have a major impact on businesses. While still in the rebuilding stage after Hurricane Katrina hit in 2005, the U.S. Gulf Coast suffered another disaster in April 2010 as a result of an explosion on the Deepwater Horizon oil rig, which killed 11 workers and sent more than 3 million barrels of oil into the Gulf of Mexico. This event, which played out for more than 87 days, severely affected the environment, businesses, tourism, and people's livelihoods. Global oil conglomerate BP, which was responsible for the oil spill, has spent more than $60 billion in response to the disaster and cleanup. Years after the explosion, tourism and other businesses are recovering, although scientists will continue to discover the long-term environmental consequences of the oil spill. No one business is large or powerful enough to create major changes in the external environment. Thus, managers are primarily adapters to rather than agents of change. Global competition is basically an uncontrollable element in the external environment. In some situations, however, a firm can influence external events through its strategies. For example, major U.S. pharmaceutical companies have been successful in getting the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, to speed up the approval process for new drugs. The 5 largest companies in the S&P index, Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Alphabet, Google, and Amazon, with Meta, Facebook following close behind, annually spend millions on lobbying activities in the nation's capital in an effort to help policymakers understand the tech industry and the importance of innovation and an open internet. Let's now take a brief look at these varied environmental influences. Economic influences. This category is one of the most important external influences on businesses. Fluctuations in the level of economic activity create business cycles that affect businesses and individuals in many ways. When the economy is growing, for example, unemployment rates are low and income levels rise. Inflation and interest rates are other areas that change according to economic activity. Through the policies it sets, such as taxes and interest rate levels, a government attempts to stimulate or curtail the level of economic activity. In addition, the forces of supply and demand determine how prices and quantities of goods and services behave in a free market. Political and legal influences. The political climate of a country is another critical factor for managers to consider in day-to-day business operations. The amount of government activity, the types of laws it passes, and the general political stability of a government are 3 components of political climate. For example, a multinational company such as 3M will evaluate the political climate of a country before deciding to locate a plant there. Is the government stable, or might a coup disrupt the country? How restrictive are the regulations for foreign businesses, including foreign ownership of business property and taxation? Import tariffs, quotas, and export restrictions also must be taken into account. In the United States, laws passed by Congress and the many regulatory agencies cover such areas as competition, minimum wages, environmental protection, worker safety, and copyrights and patents. For example, Congress passed the Telecommunications Act of 1996 to deregulate the telecommunications industry. As a result, competition increased, and new opportunities arose as traditional boundaries between service providers blurred. With the technological advancements, the focus of the telecommunications industry has shifted to AI, network infrastructure, and optimization to reduce costs, and cybersecurity. Federal agencies play a significant role in business operations. When Johnson & Johnson wants to bring a new medication for heart disease to market, it must follow the procedures set by the Food and Drug Administration for testing and clinical trials and secure FDA approval. Before issuing stock, Johnson & Johnson must register the securities with the Securities and Exchange Commission. The Federal Trade Commission will penalize Johnson & Johnson if its advertisements promoting the drug's benefits are misleading. These are just a few ways the political and legal environment affects business decisions. States and local governments also exert control over businesses, imposing taxes, issuing corporate charters and business licenses, setting zoning ordinances, and similar regulations. We discuss the legal environment in greater detail in a separate appendix. Demographic factors. Demographic factors are an uncontrollable factor in the business environment and extremely important to managers. Demography is the study of people's vital statistics, such as their age, gender, race and ethnicity, and location. Demographics help companies define the markets for their products and also determine the size and composition of the workforce. You'll encounter demographics as you continue your study of business. Demographics are at the heart of many business decisions. Businesses today must deal with the unique shopping preferences of different generations, which each require marketing approaches and goods and services targeted to their needs. For example, the more than 75 million members of the millennial generation were born between 1981 and 1997, becoming America's largest generation. The marketing impact of millennials continues to be immense. They are technologically savvy and digitally connected, with billions of dollars to spend, mostly on travel and entertainment. Other age groups, such as Generation X, people born between 1965 and 1980, and the baby boomers, born between 1946 and 1964, also have their own spending patterns. Many boomers have money and are willing to spend it on healthcare, dining out, and leisure activities. As demographics shift, businesses are adapting and offering more products that appeal to the current spenders. In addition, minorities represent nearly half of the total population, with immigration bringing millions of new residents to the country over the past several decades. By 2060, the U.S. Census Bureau projects the minority population to increase to 56% of the total U.S. population. Companies recognize the value of hiring a diverse workforce that reflects our society. Minorities' buying power has increased significantly as well, and companies are developing products and marketing campaigns that target different ethnic groups. Social factors. Social factors, our attitudes, values, ethics, and lifestyles, influence what, how, where, and when people purchase products or services. They are difficult to predict, define, and measure because they can be very subjective. They also change as people move through different life stages. Although we can develop traditional consumer profiles, people have a range of interests that might present a deviation from expected purchasing habits. Family dynamics change and evolve over time. Shifts such as dual income households, higher demand for time-saving goods and services, and changing family shopping patterns from in-store to online all present challenges to businesses when marketing their products. In addition, companies are facing an emphasis on managing ethical behavior in their organizations and navigating the challenges of societal shifts with regard to diversity and inclusion.
Managing change. Balancing comes easy at H&R Block. In an industry driven by deadlines and details, it's hard to imagine striking a balance between work and everyday life for full-time employees and seasonal staff. Fortunately, the management team at H&R Block not only believes in maintaining a strong culture, it also tries to offer flexibility to its more than 70,000 employees and seasonal workers in 12,000 retail offices worldwide. Based in Kansas City, Missouri, and built on a culture of providing exceptional customer service, H&R Block has been repeatedly named the top U.S. business with the best work-life balance by online job search site Indeed. Analyzing more than 10 million company reviews by employees, Indeed researchers annually identify the top 20 firms with the best work well-being. H&R Block is consistently listed in the top 20. along with mortgage lender Network Capital Funding Corporation, fast food chain In-N-Out Burger, Texas food retailer H-E-B, and health services company Kaiser Permanente, among others. According to Paul Wolf, former SVP of Human Resources at Indeed, empathy on the part of organizations is a key factor in helping employees achieve balance. Wolf says companies that demonstrate empathy and work diligently to provide personal time for all employees tend to take the top spots on the work-life balance list. Comments we have seen from employee reviews for these companies indicate fair and flexible work environments, he says. In this 24/7 world, when no one is far from a text or tweet, finding time for both family and work can be difficult, especially in the tax services industry, which is so schedule-driven for a good part of the year. Making a commitment to help workers achieve a healthy work-life balance not only helps its employees, but it also helps H&R Block retain workers in a tight labor market where individuals continue to have choices when it comes to where and for whom they want to work. Questions for discussion. How does management's support of employee work-life balance help the company's bottom line? What can other organizations learn from H&R Block when it comes to offering employee perks that encourage personal time for workers, even during the busy tax season?
Technology. The application of technology can stimulate growth under capitalism or any other economic system. Technology is the application of science and engineering skills and knowledge to solve production and organizational problems. New equipment and software that improve productivity and reduce costs can be among a company's most valuable assets. The emergence and growth of AI technology is having a significant impact on the business environment. This technology can expedite solving production and organizational problems, as well as open up new business opportunities. It can be incorporated into virtually all business functions in some capacity. As the technology evolves, businesses will need to adapt to take advantage of the benefits. Productivity is the amount of goods and services an individual can produce. Our ability as a nation to maintain and build wealth depends in large part on the speed and effectiveness with which we use technology to invent and adapt more efficient equipment, to improve manufacturing productivity, to develop new products, and to process information and make it instantly available across the organization, and to suppliers and customers. Many U.S. businesses, large and small, use technology to create change, improve efficiencies, and streamline operations. For example, advances in cloud computing provide businesses with the ability to access and store data without running applications or programs housed on a physical computer or server in their offices. Such applications and programs can now be accessed through the internet. Mobile technology allows businesses to communicate with employees, customers, suppliers, and others at the swipe of a tablet or smartphone screen. Robots help businesses automate repetitive tasks that free up workers to focus on more knowledge-based tasks critical to business operations.
Concept check. 1. Define the components of the internal and the external business environments. 2. What factors within the economic environment affect businesses? 3. Why do demographic shifts and technological developments create both challenges and new opportunities for business? 1.3. How business and economics work. Learning objective. What are the primary features of the world's economic systems, and how are the three sectors of the U.S. economy linked?
A business's success depends in part on the economic systems of the countries where it is located and where it sells its products. A nation's economic system is the combination of policies, laws, and choices made by its government to establish the systems that determine what goods and services are produced and how they are allocated. Economics is the study of how a society uses scarce resources to produce and distribute goods and services. The resources of a person, a firm, or a nation are limited. Hence, economics is the study of choices. What people, firms, or nations choose from among the available resources. Every economy is concerned with what types and amounts of goods and services should be produced, how they should be produced, and for whom. These decisions are made by the marketplace, the government, or both. In the United States, the government and the free market system together guide the economy. You probably know more about economics than you realize. Every day, many news stories deal with economic matters. Employees at a large corporation decide to strike demanding higher wages and better benefits. Interest rates are changed by the Federal Reserve. The S&P 500 has a record day. Lawmakers review a proposal to cut taxes. Consumer spending responds to changes in the inflation rate. To mention just a few examples. Global economic systems. Businesses and other organizations operate according to the economic systems of their home countries. Today, the world's major economic systems fall into two broad categories: free market, or capitalism, and planned economies, which include communism and socialism. However, in reality, many countries use a mixed market system that incorporates elements from more than one economic system. The major differentiator among economic systems is whether the government or individuals decide how to allocate limited resources, the factors of production, to individuals and organizations to best satisfy unlimited societal needs. What goods and services to produce, and in what quantities. How and by whom these goods and services are produced. How to distribute goods and services to consumers. Managers must understand and adapt to the economic system or systems in which they operate. Companies that do business internationally may discover that they must make changes in production and selling methods to accommodate the economic system of other countries. We will now summarize key factors of the world's economic systems.
The basic economic systems of the world. Capitalism. Under capitalism, businesses are privately owned with minimal government ownership or interference. The control of markets is exercised by private individuals and businesses, where the forces of supply and demand control the market with limited governmental control. Workers have strong incentive to work and innovate because profits are retained by owners. In terms of management, each enterprise is managed by owners or professional managers with little government interference. This system allows for a quick response to change, allowing the market to drive the adoption of new products and technologies. A historic example is the United States.
Communism. Under communism, the government owns all or most enterprises. There is also complete government control of markets. In terms of worker incentives, working is seen as a societal obligation to advance the common good, as well as an obligation of citizenship. Management of enterprises is marked by centralized management by the government bureaucracy. There is little or no flexibility in decision-making at the factory level. Communism's approach to change features a strategic approach to change that is driven by the government. Historic examples include Cuba and North Korea.
Socialism. Under socialism, basic industries such as railroads and utilities are owned by government. There is very high taxation as government redistributes income from successful private businesses and entrepreneurs. Some markets are controlled, and some are free. There is significant central government planning. State enterprises are managed by bureaucrats, and these enterprises are rarely profitable. In terms of worker incentives, private sector incentives are the same as capitalism, while public sector incentives are the same as those in a planned economy. Management of enterprises is marked by significant government planning and regulation. Bureaucrats run government enterprises. Adaptation to change emphasizes slow and steady growth, with centralized decisions based on what is deemed socially optimal. Historic examples include Finland, India, and Israel.
Mixed economy. Under mixed economies, there is private ownership of land and businesses, but also government control of some enterprises. The private sector is typically large. Some markets, such as nuclear energy and the post office, are controlled or highly regulated. In terms of worker incentives, private sector incentives are the same as capitalism. There are limited incentives for workers in the public sector. Management of enterprises in the private sector is similar to capitalism, while the public sector is similar to socialism. There is some government intervention to control the market, so change is not as swift or as organic as in a capitalist economy. Historic examples include Great Britain, France, Sweden, and Canada.
Capitalism. In recent decades, more countries have shifted toward free market economic systems and away from planned economies. Sometimes, as was the case of the former East Germany, the transition to capitalism was painful but fairly quick. In other countries, such as Russia, the movement has been characterized by false starts and backsliding. Capitalism, also known as the private enterprise system, is based on competition in the marketplace and private ownership of the factors of production, resources. In a competitive economic system, a large number of people and businesses buy and sell products freely in the marketplace. In pure capitalism, all the factors of production are owned privately, and the government does not try to set prices or coordinate economic activity. A capitalist system guarantees certain economic rights: the right to own property, the right to make a profit, the right to make free choices, and the right to compete. The right to own property is central to capitalism. The main incentive in this system is profit, which encourages entrepreneurship. Profit is also necessary for producing goods and services, building manufacturing plants, paying dividends and taxes, and creating jobs. The freedom to choose whether to become an entrepreneur or to work for someone else means that people have the right to decide what they want to do on the basis of their own drive, interest, and training. The government does not create job quotas for each industry or give people tests to determine what they will do. Competition is good for both businesses and consumers in a capitalist system. It leads to better and more diverse products, keeps prices stable, and increases the efficiency of producers. Companies try to produce their goods and services at the lowest possible cost and sell them at the highest possible price. But when profits are high, more businesses enter the market to seek a share of those profits. The resulting competition among companies tends to lower prices. Companies must then find new ways of operating more efficiently if they are to keep making a profit and stay in business. Communism. The complete opposite of capitalism is communism. In a communist economic system, the government owns virtually all resources and controls all markets. Economic decision-making is centralized. The government, rather than the competitive forces in the marketplace, decides what will be produced, where it will be produced, how much will be produced, where the raw materials and supplies will come from, who will get the output, and what the prices will be. This form of centralized economic system offers little, if any, choice to a country's citizens. Early in the 20th century, countries that chose communism, such as the former Soviet Union and China, believed that it would raise their standard of living. In practice, however, the tight controls over most aspects of people's lives, such as what careers they can choose, where they can work, and what they can buy, led to lower productivity. Individuals work because of a moral obligation to the overall good of the society. Working is viewed as a requirement of citizenship. Because of the centralized control and planning of market activity and resource allocations, supply shortages can occur. These factors were among the reasons for the 1991 collapse of the Soviet Union into multiple independent nations. Recent reforms in Russia, China, and most of the Eastern European nations have moved these economies toward more capitalistic, market-oriented systems. North Korea and Cuba are the best remaining examples of communist economic systems. Time will tell whether Cuba takes small steps toward a market economy, now that the United States reestablished diplomatic relations with the island country. Socialism. Socialism is an economic system in which the basic industries are owned by the government or by the private sector, under strong government control. A socialist state controls critical, large-scale industries such as transportation, communications, and utilities. Smaller businesses and those considered less critical, such as retail, may be privately owned. To varying degrees, the state also determines the goals of businesses, the prices and selection of goods, and the rights of workers. Socialist countries typically provide their citizens with a higher level of services, such as healthcare and unemployment benefits, than do most capitalist countries. As a result, taxes and unemployment may also be higher in socialist countries. For example, the top individual tax rate in France is 45%, compared to 37% in the United States. Tax cuts are often a campaign promise in election years as part of an overall economic agenda. Many countries, including the United Kingdom, Denmark, India, and Israel, have socialist systems, but the systems vary from country to country. In Denmark, for example, most businesses are privately owned and operated, but 2/3 of the population is sustained by the state through government welfare programs. Mixed economic systems. Pure capitalism and communism are extremes. Real-world economies fall somewhere between the two. The US economy leans toward pure capitalism, but it uses government policies to promote economic stability and growth. Also, through policies and laws, the government uses funds to provide social supports, such as to low-income or unemployed individuals, or people with disabilities. American capitalism has produced some very powerful organizations in the form of large corporations, such as Johnson & Johnson and Verizon. To protect smaller firms and entrepreneurs, the government has passed legislation that requires that the giants compete fairly against weaker competitors. Canada, Sweden, and the UK, among others, are also called mixed economies. That is, they use more than one economic system. Sometimes, the government is basically socialist and owns basic industries. In Canada, for example, the government owns the communications, transportation, and utilities industries, as well as some of the natural resource industries. It also provides healthcare to its citizens, but most other activity is carried on by private enterprise, as in a capitalist system. In 2016, UK citizens voted for Britain to leave the European Union. The impact of the Brexit decision on the UK economy and other economies around the world has been mixed, with some highlighting that the positive outcomes outweigh the short-term negative impacts. The few factors of production owned by the government in a mixed economy include some public lands, the postal service, and some water resources. But the government is extensively involved in the economic system through taxing, spending, and welfare activities. The economy is also mixed in the sense that the country tries to achieve many social goals, income redistribution and retirement pensions, for example, that may not be attempted in purely capitalist systems. Macroeconomics and microeconomics. The state of the economy affects both people and businesses. Personal economic decisions involve deciding how and when to spend or save money for items such as education or leisure activities. Every business also operates within the economy. Based on their economic expectations, businesses decide what products to produce, how to price them, how many people to employ, how much to pay these employees, how much to expand the business, and so on. Economics has two main sub-areas. Macroeconomics is the study of the economy as a whole. It looks at aggregate data for large groups of people, companies, or products considered as a whole. In contrast, microeconomics focuses on individual parts of the economy, such as households or firms. Both macroeconomics and microeconomics offer a valuable outlook on the economy. For example, Toyota might use both to decide whether to introduce a new line of vehicles. The company would consider such macroeconomic factors as the national level of personal income, the unemployment rate, interest rates, fuel costs, and the national level of sales of new vehicles. From a microeconomic viewpoint, Toyota would judge consumer demand for new vehicles versus the existing supply, competing models, labor and material costs, and availability, and current prices and sales incentives. Economics as a circular flow. Another way to see how the sectors of the economy interact is to examine the circular flow of inputs and outputs among households, businesses, and governments, as shown in Exhibit 1.6. Let's review the exchanges by following the middle ring of the diagram. Households provide inputs, such as natural resources, labor, capital, entrepreneurship, and knowledge, to businesses, which convert these inputs into outputs, namely goods and services, for consumers. In return, households receive income from rent, wages, interest, and ownership profits. Businesses receive revenue from consumer purchases of goods and services. The other important exchange, in Exhibit 1.6, takes place between governments, including federal, state, and local governments, and both households and businesses. Governments supply many types of publicly provided goods and services, such as highways, schools, police, courts, health services, unemployment insurance, and Social Security that benefit consumers and businesses. Government purchases from businesses also contribute to business revenues. When a construction firm repairs a local stretch of state highway, for example, government pays for the work. As the diagram shows, government receives taxes from households and businesses to complete the flow. Changes in one flow affect the others. If government raises taxes, households have less to spend on goods and services. Lower consumer spending causes businesses to reduce production and economic activity declines. Unemployment may rise. In contrast, cutting taxes can stimulate economic activity. Keep the circular flow in mind as we continue our study of economics. The way economic sectors interact will become more evident as we explore macroeconomics and microeconomics.
Concept check. 1. What is economics and how can you benefit from understanding basic economic concepts? 2. Compare and contrast the world's major economic systems. Why is capitalism growing, communism declining, and socialism still popular? 3. What is the difference between macroeconomics and microeconomics?
One point 4 Macroeconomics. The big picture. Learning objective. How do economic growth, full employment, price stability, and inflation indicate a nation's economic health?
Have you ever looked at CNN's headline news on a mobile device or turned on the radio and heard something like, "Today, the Labor Department reported that for the second straight month, unemployment declined"? Statements like this are macroeconomic news. Understanding the national economy and how changes in government policies affect households and businesses is a good place to begin our study of economics. Let's look first at macroeconomic goals and how they can be met. The United States and most other countries have three main macroeconomic goals: economic growth, full employment, and price stability. A nation's economic well-being depends on carefully defining these goals and choosing the best economic policies for achieving them. Striving for economic growth. Perhaps the most important way to judge a nation's economic health is to look at its production of goods and services. The more the nation produces, the higher its standard of living. An increase in the nation's output of goods and services is economic growth. The most basic measure of economic growth is the gross domestic product, GDP. GDP is the total market value of all final goods and services produced within a nation's borders each year. The Bureau of Labor Statistics publishes quarterly GDP figures that can be used to compare trends in national output. When GDP rises, the economy is growing. The rate of growth in real GDP, GDP adjusted for inflation, is also important. For many years, the U.S. economy has been growing at a slow but steady rate of between 3 and 4% annually. This growth rate has meant a steady increase in the output of goods and services, and relatively low unemployment. When the growth rate slides towards zero, the economy begins to stagnate and decline. One country that continues to grow more rapidly than most is China, whose GDP has been growing around 5% per year. Today, few things in the global marketplace are not or cannot be made in China. The primary contributor to China's rapid growth has been technology. For example, most tablets and laptops are manufactured in China. The level of economic activity is constantly changing. These upward and downward changes are called business cycles. Business cycles vary in length, in how high or low the economy moves, and in how much the economy is affected. Changes in GDP trace the patterns as economic activity expands and contracts. An increase in business activity results in rising output, income, employment, and prices. Eventually, these all peak, and output, income, and employment decline. A decline in GDP that lasts for 2 consecutive quarters, each a 3-month period, is called a recession. It is followed by a recovery period when economic activity once again increases. The Great Recession began in December 2007 and ended in June 2009. However, the more recent recession was during the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. Businesses must monitor and react to the changing phases of business cycles. When the economy is growing, companies often have a difficult time hiring good employees, and finding scarce supplies and raw materials. When a recession hits, many firms find they have more capacity than the demand for their goods and services requires. During a recession, many businesses operate at substantially lower than capacity. When plants use only part of their capacity, they operate inefficiently and have higher costs per unit produced. Let's say that Mars Incorporated has a huge plant that can produce 1 million bags of Skittles a day. But because of a recession, Mars can sell only 500,000 candy bars a day. The plant uses large, expensive machines. Producing Milky Ways at 50% capacity does not efficiently utilize Mars's investment in its plant and equipment. Keeping people on the job. Another macroeconomic goal is full employment, or having jobs for all who want to and can work. Full employment doesn't actually mean 100% employment. Some people choose not to work for personal reasons, such as attending school or raising children, or are temporarily unemployed while they wait to start a new job. Thus, the government defines full employment as the situation when about 94 to 96% of those available to work actually have jobs. During the COVID-19 recession in the United States, the unemployment rate rose to nearly 15% in the early months of the pandemic. Today, that rate hovers at about 4%. Maintaining low unemployment levels is of concern not just to the United States, but also to countries around the world. For example, high youth unemployment rates for workers 25 years of age and younger in Spain, Italy, and Greece have caused protests in these European countries as elected officials struggle with how to turn around their respective economies and put more people, particularly young people, back to work. Changes such as the UK's exit from the European Union have the potential for widespread impacts to the labor market that could be both positive and negative. Measuring unemployment. To determine how close we are to full employment, the government measures the unemployment rate. This rate indicates the percentage of the total labor force that is not working but is actively looking for work. It excludes discouraged workers, those not seeking jobs because they think no one will hire them. Each month, the U.S. Department of Labor releases statistics on employment. These figures help us understand how well the economy is doing. Types of unemployment. Economists classify unemployment into 4 types: frictional, structural, cyclical, and seasonal. The categories are of small consolation to someone who is unemployed, but they help economists understand the problem of unemployment in our economy. Frictional unemployment is short-term unemployment that is not related to the business cycle. It includes people who are unemployed while waiting to start a better job, those who are re-entering the job market, and those entering for the first time, such as new college graduates. This type of unemployment is always present and has little impact on the economy. Structural unemployment is also unrelated to the business cycle, but is involuntary. It is caused by a mismatch between available jobs and the skills of available workers in an industry or a region. For example, if the birth rate declines, fewer teachers will be needed, or the available workers in an area may lack the skills that employers want. Retraining and skill-building programs are often required to reduce structural unemployment. Cyclical unemployment, as the name implies, occurs when a downturn in the business cycle reduces the demand for labor throughout the economy. In a long recession, cyclical unemployment is widespread, and even people with good job skills can't find jobs. The government can partly counteract cyclical unemployment with programs that boost the economy. In the past, cyclical unemployment affected mainly less skilled workers and those in heavy manufacturing. Typically, they would be rehired when economic growth increased. Since the 1990s, however, competition has forced many U.S. companies to downsize so they can survive in the global marketplace. These job reductions affected workers in all categories, including middle management and other salaried positions. Firms continue to reevaluate workforce requirements and downsize to stay competitive to compete with companies worldwide. For example, after a strong rebound from the Great Recession in the early 2000s, when the auto industry slashed more than 200,000 hourly and salaried workers from their payrolls, the automakers are now taking another close look at the size of their global workforces. For example, Ford's workforce in North America was increased by 25% over a 5-year time period. Then, in response to leveling car sales figures, the workforce was reduced to lower costs, boost profits, and manage the stock value for shareholders. The last type is seasonal unemployment, which occurs during specific times of the year in certain industries. Employees subject to seasonal unemployment include retail workers hired for busy holiday seasons, agricultural laborers varying throughout growing seasons, and service employees in seasonal tourist destinations. Keeping prices steady. The third macroeconomic goal is to keep overall prices for goods and services fairly steady. The situation in which the average of all prices of goods and services is rising is called inflation. Inflation's higher prices reduce purchasing power, the value of what money can buy. Purchasing power is a function of two things: inflation and income. If incomes rise at the same rate as inflation, there is no change in purchasing power. If prices go up, but income doesn't rise or rises at a slower rate, a given amount of income buys less, and purchasing power falls. For example, if the price of a basket of groceries rises from $30 to $40, but your salary remains the same, you can buy only 75% as many groceries. $30 divided by $40 for $30. Your purchasing power declines by 25%. $10 divided by $40. If incomes rise at a rate faster than inflation, then purchasing power increases. So you can, in fact, have rising purchasing power even if inflation is increasing. Typically, however, inflation rises faster than incomes, leading to a decrease in purchasing power. Inflation affects both personal and business decisions. When prices are rising, people tend to spend more before their purchasing power declines further. Businesses that expect inflation often increase their supplies, and people often speed up planned purchases of cars and major appliances. Historically, the inflation rate in the United States has hovered around 4%. However, it has surged as high as nearly 14% in response to economic conditions. For example, in the 1980s, the United States had periods of inflation in the 12 to 13% range. Some nations have had high double and even triple-digit inflation rates. For example, the inflation rate in Cuba is nearly 30%, and Argentina's is almost 200%. Types of inflation. There are two types of inflation. Demand pull inflation occurs when the demand for goods and services is greater than the supply. Would-be buyers have more money to spend than the amount needed to buy available goods and services. Their demand, which exceeds the supply, tends to pull prices up. This situation is sometimes described as too much money chasing too few goods. The higher prices lead to greater supply, eventually creating a balance between demand and supply. Cost push inflation is triggered by increases in production costs, such as expenses for materials and wages. These increases push up the prices of final goods and services. Wage increases are a major cause of cost push inflation, creating a wage price spiral. For example, assume the UAW, the United Automobile Aerospace, and Agricultural Implement Workers of America International Union, which is a labor union advocating for employees in those industries, negotiates a 3-year labor agreement that raises wages 3% per year and increases overtime pay. Car makers will then raise car prices to cover their higher labor costs. Also, the higher wages will give auto workers more money to buy goods and services, and this increased demand may pull up other prices. Workers in other industries will demand higher wages to keep up with the increased prices, and the cycle will push prices even higher. How inflation is measured. The rate of inflation is most commonly measured by looking at changes in the Consumer Price Index, CPI, an index of the prices of a market basket of goods and services purchased by typical urban consumers. It is published monthly by the Department of Labor. Major components of the CPI, which are weighted by importance, are food and beverages, clothing, transportation, housing, medical care, recreation, and education. There are special indexes for food and energy. The Department of Labor collects about 100,000 retail price quotes and 8,000 housing rent figures to calculate the CPI. The CPI sets prices in a base period at 100. The base period, which now is 1982 to 1984, is chosen for its price stability. Current prices are then expressed as a percentage of prices in the base period. A rise in the CPI means prices are increasing. For example, the CPI was 324.8 in September 2025, meaning that prices have more than tripled since the base period. Changes in wholesale prices are another important indicator of inflation. The Producer Price Index, PPI, measures the prices paid by producers and wholesalers for various commodities, such as raw materials, partially finished goods, and finished products. The PPI, which uses 1982 as its base year, is actually a family of indexes for many different product categories, including crude goods, raw materials, intermediate goods, which become part of finished goods, and finished goods. For example, the PPI for finished goods is currently 266.01, which represents an annual growth rate of approximately 3%. The PPI for chemicals is 350.83, with an annual growth rate of nearly 3.5%. Examples of other PPI indexes include processed foods, lumber, containers, fuels and lubricants, metals, and construction. Because the PPI measures prices paid by producers for raw materials, energy, and other commodities, it may foreshadow subsequent price changes for businesses and consumers. The impact of inflation. Inflation has several negative effects on people and businesses. For one thing, inflation penalizes people who live on fixed incomes. Let's say that a couple receives $2,000 a month retirement income beginning in 2026. If inflation is 10% in 2027, then the couple can buy only about 91%, 100 divided by 110, of what they could purchase in 2018. Similarly, inflation hurts savers. As prices rise, the real value or purchasing power of a nest egg of savings deteriorates.
Concept check. 1. What is a business cycle? How do businesses adapt to periods of contraction and expansion? 2. Why is full employment usually defined as a target percentage below 100%? 3. What is the difference between demand pull and cost push inflation?
1.5. Achieving macroeconomic goals. Learning objective. How does the government use monetary policy and fiscal policy to achieve its macroeconomic goals?
To reach macroeconomic goals, countries must often choose among conflicting alternatives. Sometimes, political needs override economic needs. For example, bringing inflation under control may call for a politically difficult period of high unemployment and low growth. Or, in an election year, politicians may resist raising taxes to curb inflation. Still, the government must try to guide the economy to a sound balance of growth, employment, and price stability. The two main tools it uses are monetary policy and fiscal policy. Monetary policy. Monetary policy refers to a government's programs for controlling the amount of money circulating in the economy and interest rates. Changes in the money supply affect both the level of economic activity and the rate of inflation. The Federal Reserve System, the Fed, the central banking system of the United States, projects the likely demand for new currency and places an order with the Department of the Treasury's Bureau of Engraving and Printing for U.S. currency, paper money. And the U.S. Mint makes U.S. coins and charges the Fed for the cost of production. The money supply is also controlled by the Fed's regulation of certain bank activities. When the Fed increases or decreases the amount of money in circulation, it affects interest rates, the cost of borrowing money, and the reward for lending it. The Fed can change the interest rate on money it lends to banks to signal the banking system and financial markets that it has changed its monetary policy. These changes have a ripple effect. Banks, in turn, may pass along this change to consumers and businesses that receive loans from the banks. If the cost of borrowing increases, the economy slows because interest rates affect consumer and business decisions to spend or invest. The housing industry, business, and investments react most to changes in interest rates. As a result of the Great Recession of 2007 to 2009 and the global financial crisis that ensued, the Fed dropped the federal funds rate, the interest rate charged on overnight loans between banks, to 0% in December 2008 and kept the rate at 0 until December 2015, when it raised the rate to 0.25%. This decision marked the first increase in the federal funds rate since June 2006, when the federal funds rate was 5.25%. As the U.S. economy showed a slow but steady expansion after the Great Recession, the Fed subsequently increased the federal funds rate to a range of 0.75 to 1%. As the economy continued to recover from the Great Recession, interest rates were further adjusted. The interest rate in early 2026 was 3.75 to 4%. As expected, this change has a ripple effect. The regional Federal Reserve banks increased the discount rate they charge commercial banks. For short-term loans, many commercial banks raise the interest rates they charge their customers. And credit card companies increase the annual percentage rate, APR, they charge consumers on their credit card balances. As you can see, the Fed can use monetary policy to contract or expand the economy. With contractionary policy, the Fed restricts or tightens the money supply by selling government securities or raising interest rates. The result is slower economic growth and higher unemployment. Thus, contractionary policy reduces spending and ultimately lowers inflation. With expansionary policy, the Fed increases or loosens growth in the money supply. An expansionary policy stimulates the economy. Interest rates decline, so business and consumer spending go up. Unemployment rates drop as businesses expand, but increasing the money supply also has a negative side. More spending pushes prices up, increasing the inflation rate. Fiscal policy. The other economic tool used by the government is fiscal policy, its program of taxation and spending. By cutting taxes or by increasing spending, the government can stimulate the economy. Look again at Exhibit 1.6. The more government buys from businesses, the greater the business revenues and output. Likewise, if consumers or businesses have to pay less in taxes, they will have more income to spend for goods and services. Tax policies in the United States therefore affect business decisions. High corporate taxes can make it harder for U.S. firms to compete with companies in countries with lower taxes. As a result, companies may choose to locate facilities abroad to reduce their tax burden. Taxes are, of course, the major source of revenue for our government. Every year, the president prepares a budget for the coming year based upon estimated revenues and expenditures. Congress receives the president's report and recommendations, and then, typically, debates and analyzes the proposed budget for several months. The president's original proposal is always modified in numerous ways. Exhibit 1.9 shows the sources of revenue and expenses for the U.S. budget. Whereas fiscal policy has a major impact on business and consumers, continual increases in government spending raises another important issue. When government takes more money from business and consumers, the private sector, a phenomenon known as crowding out occurs. Here are 3 examples of crowding out. The government spends more on public libraries, and individuals buy fewer books at bookstores. The government spends more on public education, and individuals spend less on private education. The government spends more on public transportation, and individuals spend less on private transportation. In other words, government spending is crowding out private spending. If the government spends more for programs, social services, education, defense, than it collects in taxes, the result is a federal budget deficit. To balance the budget, the government can cut its spending, increase taxes, or do some combination of the two. When it cannot balance the budget, the government must make up any shortfalls by borrowing, just like any business or household. In 1998, for the first time in a generation, there was a federal budget surplus, revenue exceeding spending, of about $71 billion. That budget surplus was short-lived, however. By 2005, the The deficit was more than $318 billion. In the fiscal year of 2009, the federal deficit was at a record high for that time period of more than $1.413 trillion. However, by the end of 2015, the deficit had decreased to $439 billion. The U.S. government has run budget deficits for many years. The accumulated total of these past deficits is the national debt, which now amounts to $40 trillion, or over $100,000 per person in the United States. Total interest on the debt is over $1 trillion per year. To cover the deficit, the U.S. government borrows money from people and businesses in the form of Treasury bills, Treasury notes, and Treasury bonds. These are federal IOUs that pay interest to their owners. The national debt is an important issue debated not only in the halls of Congress, but by the public as well. Some believe that deficits contribute to economic growth, high employment, and price stability. Others have the following reservations about such a high national debt. Not everyone holds the debt. The government is very conscious of who actually bears the burden of the national debt and keeps track of who holds what bonds. If only those with higher incomes were bondholders, then they alone would receive the interest payments and could end up receiving more in interest than they paid in taxes. In the meantime, individuals in the lower income brackets who held no bonds would end up paying taxes that would be transferred to the rich as interest, making the debt an unfair burden to them. At times, therefore, the government has instructed commercial banks to reduce their total debt by divesting some of their bond holdings. That's also why the Treasury created savings bonds. Because these bonds are issued in relatively small denominations, they allow more people to buy and hold government debt. It crowds out private investment. The national debt also affects private investment. If the government raises the interest rate on bonds to be able to sell them, it forces private businesses whose corporate bonds, long-term debt obligations issued by a company, compete with government bonds for investor dollars to raise rates on their bonds to stay competitive. In other words, selling government debt to finance government spending makes it more costly for private industry to finance its own investment. As a result, government debt may end up crowding out private investment and slowing economic growth in the private sector.
Concept check. 1. What are the two kinds of monetary policy? 2. What fiscal policy tools can the government use to achieve its macroeconomic goals? 3. What problems can a large national debt present?
(1.6) Microeconomics. Zeroing in on businesses and consumers. Learning objective. What are the basic microeconomic concepts of demand and supply, and how do they establish prices?
Now let's shift our focus from the whole economy to microeconomics, the study of households, businesses, and industries. This field of economics is concerned with how prices and quantities of goods and services behave in a free market. It stands to reason that people, firms, and governments try to get the most from their limited resources. Consumers make purchases for a variety of reasons, from getting the best quality at the lowest price, to purchasing products to support local businesses, or to support their lifestyle by purchasing organic products, as just a few examples. Businesses want to keep costs down and revenues high to earn larger profits. Governments also want to use their revenues to provide the most effective public goods and services possible. These groups choose among alternatives by focusing on the prices of goods and services. As consumers, in a free market, we influence what is produced. If Mexican food is popular, the high demand attracts entrepreneurs who open more Mexican restaurants. They want to compete for our dollars by supplying Mexican food at a lower price, of better quality, or with different features such as Santa Fe Mexican food, rather than Tex-Mex. This section explains how business and consumer choices influence the price and availability of goods and services. The nature of demand. Demand is the quantity of a good or service that people are willing to buy at various prices. The higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded, and vice versa. A graph of this relationship is called a demand curve. Let's assume you own a store that sells cold weather gear for winter sports enthusiasts. From past experience, you know how many jackets you can sell at different prices. The demand curve in Exhibit 1.11 depicts this information. The x-axis, the horizontal axis, shows the quantity of jackets, and the y-axis, the vertical axis, shows the related price of those jackets. For example, at a price of $100, customers will demand 600 snowboard jackets. In the graph, the demand curve slopes downward and to the right because as the price falls, people will want to buy more jackets. Some people who were not going to buy a jacket will purchase one at the lower price. Also, some snowboarders who already have a jacket will buy a second one. The graph also shows that if you put a large number of jackets on the market, you will have to reduce the price to sell all of them. Understanding demand is critical to businesses. Demand tells you how much you can sell and at what price. In other words, how much money the firm will take in that can be used to cover costs and hopefully earn a profit. Gouging demand is difficult even for the very largest corporations, but particularly for small firms. The nature of supply. Demand alone is not enough to explain how the market sets prices. We must also look at supply, the quantity of a good or service that businesses will make available at various prices. The higher the price, the greater the number of jackets a supplier will supply. And vice versa. A graph of the relationship between various prices and the quantities a business will supply is a supply curve. We can again plot the quantity of jackets on the x-axis and the price on the y-axis. As Exhibit 1.12 shows, 800 jackets will be available at a price of $100. Note that the supply curve slopes upward and to the right, the opposite of the demand curve. If snowboarders are willing to pay higher prices, suppliers of jackets will buy more inputs, for example, Gore-Tex fabric, dye, machinery, and labor, and produce more jackets. The quantity supplied will be higher at higher prices because manufacturers can earn higher profits. How demand and supply interact to determine prices. In a stable economy, the number of jackets that snowboarders demand depends on the jacket's price. Likewise, the number of jackets that suppliers provide depends on price. But at what price will consumer demand for jackets match the quantity suppliers will produce? To answer this question, we need to look at what happens when demand and supply interact. By plotting both the demand curve and the supply curve on the same graph in Exhibit 1.13, we see that they cross at a certain quantity and price. At that point, labeled E, the quantity demanded, equals the quantity supplied. This is the point of equilibrium. The equilibrium price is $80. The equilibrium quantity is 700 jackets. At that point, there is a balance between the quantity consumers will buy and the quantity suppliers will make available. Market equilibrium is achieved through a series of quantity and price adjustments that occur organically. If the price increases to $160, suppliers produce more jackets than consumers are willing to buy, and a surplus results. To sell more jackets, prices will have to fall. Thus, a surplus pushes prices downward until equilibrium is reached. When the price falls to $60, the quantity of jackets demanded rises above the available supply. The resulting shortage forces prices upward until equilibrium is reached at $80. The number of snowboard jackets supplied and bought at $80 will tend to rest at equilibrium unless there is a shift in either demand or supply. If demand increases, more jackets will be purchased at every price, and the demand curve shifts to the right. If demand decreases, less will be bought at every price, and the demand curve shifts to the left. When demand decreased, snowboarders bought 500 jackets at $80 instead of 700 jackets. When demand increased, they purchased 800. Changes in demand. A number of things can increase or decrease demand. For example, if snowboarders' incomes go up, they may decide to buy a second jacket. If incomes fall, a snowboarder who is planning to purchase a jacket may wear an old one instead. Changes in fashion or tastes can also influence demand. If snowboarding were suddenly to go out of fashion, demand for jackets would decrease quickly. A change in the price of related products can also influence demand. For example, if the average price of a snowboard rises to $1,000, some people may be priced out of snowboarding, and jacket demand will fall. Another factor that can shift demand is expectations about future prices. If you expect jacket prices to increase significantly in the future, you may decide to go ahead and get one today. If you think prices will fall, you may postpone your purchase. Finally, changes in the number of buyers will affect demand. Snowboarding attracts a broad range of individuals, so interest in the sport may be expected to increase. Therefore, the demand for snowboard jackets should increase. Changes in supply. Other factors influence the supply side of the picture. New technology typically lowers the cost of production. For example, Columbia Sportswear, a supplier of ski and snowboard jackets, purchased laser-guided pattern-cutting equipment and computer-aided pattern-making equipment. Each jacket was cheaper to produce, resulting in a higher profit per jacket. This provided an incentive to supply more jackets at every price. If the price of resources such as labor or fabric goes up, Columbia Sportswear will earn a smaller profit on each jacket, and the amount supplied will decrease at every price. The reverse is also true. Changes in the prices of other goods can also affect supply. Let's say that snow skiing becomes a really hot sport again. The number of skiers jumps dramatically, and the price of ski jackets soars. Columbia Sportswear can use its machines and fabrics to produce either ski or snowboard jackets. If the company can make more profit from ski jackets, it will produce fewer snowboard jackets at every price. Also, a change in the number of producers will shift the supply curve. If the number of jacket suppliers increases, they will place more jackets on the market at every price. If any suppliers stop making jackets available, the supply will naturally decrease. Taxes can also affect supply. If the government decides, for some reason, to tax the supplier for every snowboard jacket produced, then profits will fall, and fewer jackets will be offered at every price. Table 1.2 summarizes the factors that can shift demand and supply curves. To better understand the relationship between supply and demand across the economy, consider the impact of Hurricane Katrina, 2005, on U.S. energy prices. Oil and gas prices were already at high levels before Hurricane Katrina disrupted production in the Gulf Coast. Most U.S. offshore drilling sites are located in the Gulf of Mexico, and almost 30% of U.S. refining capacity is in Gulf states that were hit hard by the storm. Prices rose almost immediately as supplies fell while demand remained at the same levels. The storm drove home the vulnerability of the U.S. energy supply to not only natural disasters, but also terrorist attacks and price increases from foreign oil producers. Many energy policy experts questioned the wisdom of having such a high concentration of oil facilities, about 25% of the oil and natural gas infrastructure in hurricane-prone states. Refiners were already almost at capacity before Katrina's devastation. 25 high energy prices affect the economy in many ways. With oil at the time costing $50 to $60 a barrel, more than double the 2003 price, both businesses and consumers across the United States felt the pinch in their wallets. A majority of U.S. grain exports, especially corn and soybeans from the Midwest, moved through Gulf ports, with the balance via the Pacific Northwest and other regions. With fewer usable docking spaces, barges couldn't unload and return for more crops. The supply of both transportation services and grain products was inadequate to meet demand, pushing up transportation and grain costs. Fluctuations in oil and fuel prices can contribute to rising overall prices, as a percentage of shipping costs are directly related to fuel. Since Katrina, and with other significant events, such as the pandemic, U.S. gas prices have fluctuated dramatically, with the cost of a gallon of regular gasoline peaking mid-year 2022 at nearly $5 and dropping as low as less than $2. Research reveals that around half of what is saved from lower gas prices ends up being spent by consumers, which helps the overall economy.
Concept check. 1. What is the relationship between prices and demand for a product? 2. How is market equilibrium achieved? Describe the circumstances under which the price for gasoline would have returned to equilibrium in the United States after Hurricane Katrina. 3. Draw a graph that shows an equilibrium point for supply and demand.
One 1.7. Competing in a free market. Learning objective. What are the 4 types of market structure?
One of the characteristics of a free market system is that suppliers have the right to compete with one another. The number of suppliers in a market defines the market structure. Economists identify 4 types of market structures. 1. Perfect competition. 2. Pure monopoly. 3. Monopolistic competition. And 4. Oligopoly. Perfect competition. Characteristics of perfect, pure competition include: a large number of small firms are in the market. The firms sell similar products. That is, each firm's product is very much like the products sold by other firms in the market. Buyers and sellers in the market have good information about prices, sources of supply, and so on. It is easy to open a new business or close an existing one. In a perfectly competitive market, firms sell their products at prices determined solely by forces beyond their control. Because the products are very similar, and each firm contributes only a small amount to the total quantity supplied by the industry, price is determined by supply and demand. A firm that raised its price even a little above the going rate would lose customers. In the wheat market, for example, the product is essentially the same from one wheat producer to the next. Thus, none of the producers has control over the price of wheat. Perfect competition is an ideal. No industry shows all its characteristics, but the stock market and some agricultural markets, such as those for wheat and corn, come closest. Farmers, for example, can sell all of their crops through national commodity exchanges at the current market price. Pure monopoly. At the other end of the spectrum is pure monopoly, the market structure in which a single firm accounts for all industry sales of a particular good or service. The firm is the industry. This market structure is characterized by barriers to entry, factors that prevent new firms from competing equally with the existing firm. Often, the barriers are technological or legal conditions. The Polaroid company, for example, held major patents on instant photography for years. When Kodak tried to market its own instant camera, Polaroid sued, claiming patent violations. Polaroid collected millions of dollars from Kodak. Another barrier may be one firm's control of a natural resource. De Beers Consolidated Mines Limited, for example, controlled 80 to 85% of the world's supply of uncut diamonds until the early 2000s. Public utilities, such as gas and water companies, are pure monopolies. Some monopolies are created by a government order that outlaws competition. The United States Postal Service is currently one such monopoly. Monopolistic competition. 3 characteristics define the market structure, known as monopolistic competition. Many firms are in the market. The firms offer products that are close substitutes, but still differ from one another. It is relatively easy to enter the market. Under monopolistic competition, firms take advantage of product differentiation. Industries where monopolistic competition occurs include fast food chains, beauty product lines, and clothing brands. Firms under monopolistic competition have more control over pricing than do firms under perfect competition, because consumers do not view the products as perfect substitutes. Nevertheless, firms must demonstrate product differences to justify their prices to customers. Consequently, companies use advertising to distinguish their products from others. Such distinctions may be significant or superficial. For example, Nike says, "Just do it," and Tylenol is advertised as being easier on the stomach than aspirin. Oligopoly. An oligopoly has 2 characteristics. A few firms produce most or all of the output. Large capital requirements or other factors limit the number of firms. Boeing and Airbus, large commercial aircraft, and Apple and Google, smartphone operating systems, are major players in distinct oligopolistic industries. With so few firms in an oligopoly, What one firm does has an impact on the other firms. Thus, the firms in an oligopoly watch one another closely for new technologies, product changes, and innovations, promotional campaigns, pricing, production, and other developments. Sometimes they go so far as to coordinate their pricing and output decisions, which is illegal. Many antitrust cases, legal challenges arising out of laws designed to control anti-competitive behavior, occur in oligopolies. The market structure of an industry can change over time. Take, for example, the telecommunications industry. In the 1970s and 1980s, AT&T had a monopoly on long-distance telephone service nationwide. Then the US government divided the company into 7 regional phone companies in 1984, opening the door to greater competition. Other companies such as Sprint entered the fray and built state-of-the-art fiber optic networks to win customers from the traditional providers of phone service. The 1996 Telecommunications Act changed the competitive environment yet again by allowing local phone companies to offer long-distance service in exchange for letting competition into their local markets. The telecommunications industry, including the computing and mobile markets, will change as companies evolve through mergers and acquisitions in response to market forces such as those discussed previously.
Concept check. 1. What is meant by market structure? 2. Compare and contrast perfect competition and pure monopoly. Why is it rare to find perfect competition? 3. How does an oligopoly differ from monopolistic competition?
One point eight: Trends in the business environment and competition. Learning objective: which trends are reshaping the business, microeconomic and macroeconomic environments, and competitive arena?
Trends in the business and economic environment occur in many areas. As noted earlier, today's workforce is more diverse than ever, with increasing numbers of minorities and older workers. Competition has intensified. Technology has accelerated the pace of work and the ease with which we communicate. Technological advancements, such as AI and machine learning, go beyond accelerating work and easing communication. The power of AI can be seen across the entire business environment and across industries. AI and machine learning can be utilized to facilitate innovation with product design, to tighten quality control metrics, or to identify new markets or trends. Not only can the pace of work be accelerated, but through AI technologies, the quality and precision of work can be increased. This can lead to cost savings and higher quality products and services being delivered to the end customer. Let's look at how companies are meeting the challenges of a changing workforce, the growing demand for energy, and how companies are meeting competitive challenges. Changing workforce demographics. As the baby boomer generation ages, so does the US workforce. In 2010, more than 25% of all employees were retirement age. Fast forward to the US labor force in 2024, however, and millennials have taken over the top spot in the labor market, with about 40% of the total workforce. Furthermore, some plan to keep working rather than making the decision to retire at the traditional retirement age of 65. No longer is retirement an all-or-nothing proposition, and individuals in the baby boomer generation are taking a more positive attitude toward their later years. Some Americans expect to work full or part-time after retirement, and most would probably work longer if phased retirement programs were available at their companies. Financial reasons motivate most of these older workers who worry that their longer life expectancies will mean outliving the money they saved for retirement, especially after retirement savings took a hit during the Great Recession, 2007 to 2009. For others, however, the satisfaction of working and feeling productive is more important than money alone. These converging dynamics continue to create several major challenges for companies today. Additional generational shifts that could occur in the US labor force will have an effect on how companies do business and retain their employees. Today's workforce spans 5 generations. Generation, or Gen Alpha, aged under 16. Generation Z, recent college graduates. People in their 30s and 40s, Generation Y or millennials. Generation X, aged 46 to 60, and baby boomers, people in their 60s and beyond. It is not unusual to find a worker who is 50, 60, or even 70 working for a manager who is not yet 30. People in their 50s and 60s offer their vast experience of what's worked in the past, whereas those in their 20s and 30s tend to be experimental, open to options, and unafraid to take risks. The most effective managers will be the ones who recognize generational differences and use them to the company's advantage. Many companies have developed programs such as flexible hours and telecommuting to retain older workers and benefit from their practical knowledge and problem-solving skills. In addition, companies should continually track where employees are in their career life cycles, know when they are approaching retirement age or thinking about retirement, and determine how to replace them and their knowledge and job experiences. Another factor in the changing workforce is the importance of recognizing diversity among workers of all ages and fostering an inclusive organizational culture. According to reporting by Pew and the U.S. Census Bureau, millennials are the largest generation in U.S. history, and about 44% classify themselves as something other than white. In addition, women continue to make progress on being promoted to management, despite obstacles on the path to CEO. Statistics suggest that around 10% of Fortune 500 companies have women CEOs. The most successful organizations will be the ones that recognize the importance of diversity and inclusion as part of their ongoing corporate strategies.
Managing change. EY makes diversity and inclusiveness a top priority. As older workers continue to leave the U.S. labor force, and younger individuals begin work or move to other jobs to further their careers, businesses must recognize the importance of diversity and inclusiveness as key corporate strategies. This is particularly critical as multicultural millennials become the dominant group in the U.S. workforce. One leader in embracing diversity as an important part of corporate life is EY, formerly Ernst & Young, a global leader in assurance, tax, and advisory services. EY believes its core values and business strategies are firmly based on diversity and inclusiveness, as evidenced by the company landing in the top spot of Diversity Inc.'s 2017 list of the top companies for diversity. The company has made diversity and inclusiveness key goals for nearly 400,000 employees around the world. With a diverse workforce becoming the norm, it is no longer acceptable for companies to simply hold a random seminar or two for their managers and employees to discuss diversity and inclusiveness in the workplace. Karen Trarnite, EY's Global Diversity and Inclusiveness Officer, believes that a simple, ongoing approach is the most effective way to address diversity and inclusiveness in the workplace. The company uses a decision-making strategy called PTR, or Preference, Tradition, and Requirement to help managers think about diversity and inclusiveness. The strategy challenges managers to examine preferences toward job candidates who are similar to themselves, asks them whether their decision about hiring a specific candidate is influenced by traditional characteristics of a certain role, and urges them to make their selection based on the requirements of the job rather than on their personal preferences. In other words, the decision-making tool gives people a way to question the status quo without accusing colleagues of being biased. Another way EY fosters inclusiveness is sponsoring professional network groups within the organization. These groups provide members with opportunities to network across various EY divisions, create informal mentoring relationships, and strengthen leadership skills. Some of the established employee/business resource groups within EY include Unity, LGBTQ+, Black Professional Network, Latinx Professional Network, Veterans Network, and Accessibilities, People with Disabilities. As a global company that works with clients in many countries, EY knows the importance of acknowledging different perspectives and cultures as part of its daily business. The company is committed to making sure employees as well as clients respect different viewpoints and individual differences, including background, education, gender, ethnicity, religious background, sexual orientation, ability, and technical skills. According to EY's Diversity and Inclusiveness page, research shows that a company's diverse teams are more likely to improve market share and have success in new markets, and that they demonstrate stronger collaboration and better retention. Questions for discussion. 1. How does EY's approach to diversity and inclusiveness translate to additional revenues for the company? 2. Would a company's commitment to diversity make a difference to you when interviewing for a job? Why or why not?
Global energy demands. As standards of living improve worldwide, the demand for energy continues to rise. Emerging economies such as China and India need energy to grow. Their demands are placing pressure on the world's supplies and affecting prices, as the laws of supply and demand would predict. For example, in recent years, China and India were responsible for more than half of the growth in oil products consumption worldwide. Government-backed oil and energy companies in these countries can place additional competitive pressure on privately owned companies. Countries worldwide worry about relying too heavily on one source of supply for energy. The United States imports a large share of its crude oil from Canada. Saudi Arabia supplies a smaller share than in the past. Instead of relying solely on one major source for energy, Europeans now get their natural gas from a variety of countries, including Norway, Algeria, and Russia. Foreign governments can use the dependence on energy supply as a political tool. For example, Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 caused the EU to diversify suppliers. The EU reduced their reliance on Russia for natural gas from around 45% in 2021 to under 20% by 2023. Countries and companies worldwide are seeking additional sources of supply to prevent being held captive to one supplier. For example, the relatively new technology of extracting oil from shale rock formations in the United States, known as fracking, has helped create an important resource for the country's oil industry. This innovative approach to finding new sources of energy now accounts for more than half of the country's oil output, which can help reduce U.S. dependence on foreign oil and create new jobs. Meeting competitive challenges. Companies are turning to many different strategies to remain competitive in the global marketplace. One of the most important is relationship management, which involves building, maintaining, and enhancing interactions with customers and other parties to develop long-term satisfaction through mutually beneficial partnerships. Relationship management includes both supply chain management, which builds strong bonds with suppliers, and relationship marketing, which focuses on customers. In general, the longer a customer stays with a company, the more that customer is worth. Long-term customers buy more, take less of a company's time, are less sensitive to price, and bring in new customers. Best of all, they require no acquisition or startup costs. Good long-standing customers are worth so much that in some industries, reducing customer defections by as little as 5 points, from, say, 15% to 10% per year, can double profits. Another important way companies stay competitive is through strategic alliances, also called strategic partnerships. The trend toward forming these cooperative agreements between business firms is accelerating rapidly, particularly among high-tech firms. These companies have realized that strategic partnerships are more than just important, they are critical. Strategic alliances can take many forms. Some companies enter into strategic alliances with their suppliers, who take over much of their actual production and manufacturing. For example, Nike partners with independent manufacturers to assemble much of their product lines. Other companies with complementary strengths team up. For example, Harry's, a men's grooming brand that started as a direct-to-consumer razor subscription, that now sells subscriptions and products at major retailers, teamed up with retail giant Target to improve sales and boost its brand presence among Target shoppers. Harry's products became available in Target's brick-and-mortar stores and on Target's website as part of an exclusive deal that made Target the only mass retailer to carry Harry's grooming products. In the US, men's razors and blades generate about $3 to $3.5 billion annually, with the overall men's shaving category higher.
Concept check. 1. What steps can companies take to benefit from the aging of their workers and to effectively manage a multi-generational workforce? 2. Why is the increasing demand for energy worldwide a cause for concern? 3. Describe several strategies that companies can use to remain competitive in the global economy.
Preparing for tomorrow's workplace skills. 1. Select a not-for-profit organization whose mission interests you. What are the organization's objectives? What resources does it need to achieve those goals? Select a for-profit business that provides a similar service and compare the two organizations. How does each use the factors of production? Resources, information, and systems. 2. Team activity. Form 7 teams. Each team is responsible for one of the sectors of the external business environment discussed in the chapter: economic, political, legal, demographic, social, competitive, global, and technological. Your boss, the company president, has asked each team to report on the changes in that area of the external environment and how they will affect the firm over the next 5 years. The firm is the Boeing Company. Each team should use the library, the internet, and other data sources to make its projections. Each team member should examine at least one data source. The team should then pool the data and prepare its response. A spokesperson for each team should present the findings to the class. Interpersonal, resources, and information. 3. If a friend claimed economics is all theory and not very practical, how might you counter this claim? Share your rationale with the class. Interpersonal and information. 4. Team activity. Create 2 teams of 4 people each. Have one side choose a communist economy and the other capitalism. Debate the proposition that capitalism, a command economy, is good for nations with emerging economies. Interpersonal and information. 5. What are the latest actions the federal government has taken to manage the economy? Has it used monetary policy or fiscal policy to achieve its macroeconomic goals? Summarize your findings. Information and systems. 6. As a manufacturer of smartwatch accessories, you are questioning your pricing policies. The CPI has increased around 3% per year over the last 5 years, but the prices of your products have increased at an average of 8% for the first 3 years, and then 2% for the subsequent 2 years. What does this information tell you about the economic forces, such as demand and supply, that have influenced the market for your smartwatch accessories? Resources and information.
Ethics activity. Historically, diesel cars have not been big sellers in the U.S. auto market, mainly because their engines couldn't pass the strict emission standards set up by the Environmental Protection Agency and the California Air Resources Board. In response, Volkswagen decided to develop engines specifically manufactured to meet U.S. emission standards. By 2010, VW had introduced several models of diesel cars in the United States, and their sales helped propel Volkswagen to the number 2 slot in global auto sales, after Toyota and ahead of GM. While VW was receiving major media attention for its clean diesel models, researchers from West Virginia University discovered that these so-called clean engines had been constructed with a defeat device, software that could actually tell when the car was being tested off-road for emissions and lower the level of emissions that harm the environment. By December 2014, Volkswagen agreed to voluntarily recall more than 500,000 clean diesel cars in the United States to address the emissions issues. But the scandal continued to escalate, with accusations that senior management knew about the rigged engines, and VW's CEO resigned, and several other executives were fired. Class action lawsuits and other litigation followed, and in April 2017, VW agreed to a $4.3 billion settlement, which included a criminal fine of $2.8 billion, as well as various buyback plans for the affected diesel cars. Since then, VW has experienced changes in sales in the U.S. market and has worked to develop strategies to mitigate the damage caused by the scandal. Using a web search tool, locate information about this topic, and then write responses to the following questions. Be sure to support your arguments and cite your sources. Ethical dilemma. How can VW ensure that its diesel cars now comply with U.S. emission standards? What have they done, and how effective have their strategies been? Do you agree with the billions of dollars in fines that VW will have to pay to move beyond the emissions debacle?
Critical thinking case. Walmart gets serious about e-commerce. As the world's largest retailer by total sales, Walmart has built thousands of brick-and-mortar stores in the United States, Mexico, and elsewhere. Although a success story when it comes to traditional retail locations, Walmart has struggled with its e-commerce efforts. with online sales accounting for nearly 20% of the company's $680 billion in annual sales by 2025. The company has tried several different e-commerce strategies in the past, but none of them was an overwhelming success. Some company insiders objected to the pricing strategy used for online purchases. They were fearful that Walmart's lower prices online would take customers and sales away from the retail locations. Doug McMillon, Walmart's CEO since 2014, believed a significant change was needed in the company's e-commerce business. Between 2014 and 2016, Walmart spent billions to acquire several online companies to expand its e-commerce business in an effort to take a small bite out of retail giant Amazon's success. In 2016, Walmart purchased Jet.com, an e-commerce site that sells a little bit of everything: books, clothing, electronics, and so on, at discount prices. The goal was to use the acquisition to fuel Walmart's e-commerce efforts. 4 years after the acquisition, Walmart made the decision to discontinue the Jet.com brand and website. Walmart's leadership utilized the expertise in e-commerce from Jet.com to boost their own efforts in building Walmart's market share in online sales. Additionally, Walmart worked to identify other established online companies to add to their e-commerce profile. First, Walmart purchased footwear e-tailer ShoeBuy for $70 million in January 2017. The following month, Walmart bought outdoor specialty retailer Moosejaw for $51 million, sold to Dick's Sporting Goods in 2023. Then, in March, Walmart paid $75 million for ModCloth, an eclectic shopping site for women's fashions, sold to Go Global Retail in 2019. Walmart also purchased Bonobos, a hip fashion retailer geared toward millennial men, and then later sold the company to WHP Global and Express in 2023. Reaction to the acquisitions has been mixed, depending on whom you ask. Retail analysts applaud the company's radical move, pointing out that several well-known traditional retailers have closed their doors or filed bankruptcy because they failed to take part in the e-commerce revolution. However, McMillon's decision to allow the online retailers to operate independently may help retain loyal customers. The focus on e-commerce may also prompt in-store customers to take advantage of the expanded offerings available through Walmart.com. Critical thinking questions. 1. What are some advantages of Walmart purchasing established web businesses? 2. What impact has Walmart's acquisition of non-traditional retailers had on the shopping habits of Walmart's customers? 3. How did the aggressive e-commerce plan implemented by Walmart affect operations at its retail locations? This has been Introduction to Business, 2nd edition, from OpenStax. OpenStax textbooks and this free audiobook are covered under a Creative Commons license. The full text is available at www.openstax.org. You can find this free audiobook anywhere you listen to podcasts, including Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. Instructors can even download a course shell to easily embed these recordings in Canvas courses. Learn more by visiting www.openaudio.us. Did you find this audiobook helpful? If so, please let us know by leaving a comment and sharing this recording with a colleague or a friend.